Okay, all right. Check this out. You guys ready
ahead,
for
Shane.
this? You remember this one?
Mm-hmm.
Freecreditreport.com.
That's right.
No.
That's right.
How's that for a little brain bug? A little.
This podcast is sponsored by freecreditreport.com. So
If you want to hear more on my series on how to evade taxes and walk away from debt, you can listen to the previous, the current Patreon episode. We talked a little bit about that. Dwight's personal finance tips from a very reliable source with very good credit. I'm the guy that has had interesting relationships with creditors in the past. Nobody talks about you could just walk away from debt. You could just not pay these people.
well, yeah.
You may not be able to rent or purchase anything or
get a job.
Get a job. There's a whole list of things that you might not be able to do. But you can do it.
I've got, I switched phone carriers somewhat recently, and I've got, like all of a sudden I have voicemail to text on my phone. And so I get like one of the calls that I consistently get, which I've been ignoring because I knew it was from I'm sure a debt collector or something like that. Now I get like text messages. I'm looking for it right now. I get like text messages every time they leave me a voicemail. And like, I haven't actually listened to any of these yet, but like they all have like the same like ominous last words where he says, "Talk to you soon." Well, not if I have anything to do with it.
No.
Not with voicemail.
See you in hell.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now when I was a young boy, about the age of 5, my teachers taught me I could be the greatest man alive. They told me I could change the world, be whatever I wanted to be. There was no one in the world like me. Every one of us was so unique. I'd not be an average man. No, sir, I'd be no average man. So I had those big dreams.
Welcome back, everyone, to Eat the Rich. This is a show about our political economy, late-stage capitalism, and the millionaires, billionaires, and multinational corporations hell-bent on staving off its death rattle. I'm Dwight, and today we have with us Shane.
Freecreditreport.com.
I was going to do that.
Sorry.
We have Chris.
Howdy.
And we have Carrie.
Hello.
I'm so sad that was taken
You could
from
do it too. You could do it too.
Freecreditreport.com.
Nice.
Oh, yes.
This is an episode that we've been talking about doing for a very, very long time, and I'm very excited that we were able to get to it, which is to talk about credit reporting bureaus, because more than we care to admit, they fucking run our lives. They're accountable to pretty much no one. And like most things, you don't have a choice whether or not they have a file on you. They own you in a lot of ways, and your reputation as a consumer, that is to say, a citizen living in a capitalist society where your consumption is linked towards your worth, they are extremely powerful, to say the least. And wouldn't you know it, completely fucked up and unreliable.
That's right.
I want to set this up just quickly by explaining something that is probably a surprise to few, which is that basically the reason that consumer debt came about as something that we engage in today, and something that maybe our grandparents' generation just didn't really have, was that at some point, I'm thinking starting in the 1970s, rising wages was replaced with debt. And rather than you being remunerated for your work based off of the productivity that you provide your employer, and getting more based off of your productivity, then in absence of that, you would just consume using debt, by taking on debt, by engaging in a financial transaction relationship with a creditor that owns now your future wages, basically, which is terrifying in a lot of ways. And to flesh this out, I just want to read quickly from something that I think about a lot, which is the notion of the productivity pay gap. And I'm reading here from something from the Economic Policy Institute, and this is a little kind of piece that I cannot recommend enough that you look up and like understand and digest. And basically what it illustrates, and I'll read from it in a second, what it illustrates is between 1979 and the year 2020, there was this chasm that opened up between your productivity as a worker, like how much you produce, and the wages, what you are paid by the employer, by the capitalist for that productivity. And basically the summary of it is that productivity has grown 3.5 times as much as pay. Mm-hmm. So despite the fact that productivity in this 40-year period, productivity has increased by 62%, hourly pay has only increased 17.5%.
Jesus Christ.
So, if you when you're you're fresh off of the Thanksgiving table and going home, maybe talking to your grandparents or your boomer parents or Gen X parents or whatever, and they were talking about how the kids today don't work hard. They not only is that completely untrue, but you are more productive and paid less than any previous generation. I should say a big caveat with that, obviously, was a previous financial, economic relationship in America, which was slavery. But under traditional American capitalism in the last 40 years, it has never been a worse deal to be a worker. And I'm just going to read really quickly here. What broke the link between pay and productivity? And this is from the Economic Policy Institute. It says, starting in the late 1970s, policymakers began dismantling all the policy bulwarks, helping to ensure that typical workers' wages grew with productivity. Excess unemployment was tolerated to keep any chance of inflation in check. Raises in the federal minimum wage became smaller and rarer. Labor law failed to keep pace with the growing employer hostility towards unions. Tax rates on top incomes were lowered. And anti-worker deregulatory pushes, from the deregulation of trucking and airline industries to the retreat of antitrust policy to the dismantling of financial regulations and more, succeeded again and again. In essence, policy choices made to suppress wage growth prevented potential pay growth fueled by rising productivity from translating into actual pay growth for most workers. The result of this policy shift was the sharp divergence, that's what the chasm I was talking about before, the sharp divergence between productivity and typical workers' pay shown in the graph. So again, the fruits of economic growth are not going to the workers, period. Mm-hmm. So I'm seeing this as an adjacent notion for us to understand of how debt and therefore how credit became such an intimate and extremely important part of our lives. And I love the way that you guys explained, brought up the free credit report thing. Because why is that even a thing? Mm-hmm. Why is it even a thing that we need? And you need to pay for it too? That's why free credit report came about. I'm dying on the inside of my insides. I'm so upset at this. I'm just feeling so unhealthy, harboring all this hate. Anyway, let's just take this raw passion and hatred towards these things and slow it down. Chris, let me turn it over to you. Would you please steward us and explain how these credit reporting bureaus, who they are and how it came about?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Before we get into that, though, I did just want to mention, I don't know if you guys have heard of this, but the communist Chinese have this thing called a social credit score, really Orwellian stuff, where they gather your personal information without your consent, and they use it to judge your behavior and trust your worthiness and stuff. And I mean, it's like an episode of Black Mirror or something. You guys should really educate yourselves about it. I've got some stuff from Radio Free Asia that I'll send you if you want to read it a little bit. But what's totally different from that, though, is credit reporting agencies in the United States, where they collect our personal information without our consent and use it to judge us on our behavior and grade our trustworthiness and everything like that. But they also create a whole lot of value for shareholders while they're doing it. So it's really the defining difference here. So what is a credit score? We all have them. Well, approximately 80% or so of us do. Not everyone has one for reasons that we'll get into a little bit, but most of us have a credit score. If you're anything like me, yours is bad, and you actively avoid, even knowing what it actually is, because Like all problems, if you just sort of ignore it for long enough and run away from it, it will go away. So, but basically, that's neither here nor there. But basically, all our lifetime of spending habits and our payment history and our debt and all this sort of stuff is collected and compiled and boiled down to this number that gauges our credit worthiness, right? Our truth, our trustworthiness, even, right? To quantify the risk of us like defaulting on a loan. And this number is then used to, determine all sorts of things: where we can live, if we can buy a car, or if we can buy a home, or even a cell phone. If we're going to get this job or this rental apartment, or what our insurance premiums are going to be. So these credit reporting agencies end up sort of gatekeeping certain parts of the economy and preventing a lot of people from being able to participate in them. And there's three major credit reporting agencies in the United States. There's Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. And the type of data that they collect is proprietary. It's considered a trade secret, like of the agencies in the United States. And so it doesn't need to be disclosed. We don't know exactly what the formula is, what the equation is. We do have a little bit of a rough split of the components of like what goes into the score and what weight each thing is given. The breakdown of that is 35% of that is payment history. And what they're looking for here is things like, a lack of bankruptcies, liens, judgments, repossessions, foreclosures, late payments, stuff like that. 30% of that equation is our debt burden. 15% of it is our credit history, what they call our time in file. And there's two things that are looked at here. The average age of the accounts on the report and the age of the oldest account. 10% of this is types of credit used. You benefit from having, a history of managing different types of credit. And 10% is recent searches for credit. Hard credit inquiries is what they're called, hard pulls. And this is any time that you apply for a credit card or a loan or something, it can hurt your score, especially if you do it, a lot.
So they ding you for even asking.
Yeah.
They do. If you apparently, I believe the way it works is if you like, for your own personal reference, request a copy of your credit score. I don't think it dings you for that, but it does if you are, applying for a loan or a card or something like that. If you're trying to do something and somebody else pulls your credit, that can ding you.
Yeah, it's a hard inquiry versus a soft pull. Like you can do soft pulls on various websites to get your credit scores and stuff, but if you are at a place and they want to check your credit, it's a hard inquiry.
Exactly. And so all of this information is compiled and collected and sold to banks and to mortgage lenders and credit card companies. And it's data about us. It's our personal data that's collected without our permission and then profited from. And they're basically like a cartel. Like I said, there's three big ones, and they completely dominate the market and are pretty much unregulated and unsupervised. And these private firms, dictate millions of Americans' lives, determining, like I said earlier, things such as simple as where we can live, where we can work, how much it's going to cost us to finance things. And, it can become, like if you have a bad credit history, it can become like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? By not having good credit, you may be forced to take out loans with worse terms, with worse financing. It costs a lot of money to be poor, from public transportation to rent to like the types of stores that you could buy groceries from, or like how much you need to pay for internet. There's all these sorts of like hidden additional costs built into being poor that other people just don't have to the same degree. And one of those is the interest rate that you'll need to pay on a loan if you have bad credit or if you have no credit history. And then because you get this, you're forced to settle for this loan with this exorbitant interest rate, and then you default on that loan, and then it's just going to raise the, cost of future financing for you, and it becomes like this fucking like vicious cycle.
Right.
And the way that this sort of discriminates against people breaks down very often along racial lines and along like socioeconomic lines. All of these sort of, systemic biases are baked into the algorithms used to determine the credit score. And the whole thing is like the whole process is totally opaque. Like I said, remember, these algorithms are proprietary; they're secret. So like any kind of effort to root out this built-in human bias in them would be like impossible, right? It would be like total futile effort. We don't have the ability to, access this information in a way to be able to helpfully do that. It's secret. It's a trade secret. And so, also, if you happen to have, a lot of student debt, or if you have a lot of medical debt, two concepts that on their own are already just depraved and cruel and unjust. Now you also can't finance a car. Sorry. Mm-hmm. It can be used for employment. The credit score can. It can bar you from employment. The logic there being, would you want to hire somebody in your accounting department who can't manage their own affairs? Right? Shouldn't I, as an employer, be able to see information like that about somebody if I'm hiring them for a particular job?
Or even, are you somebody that's trustworthy with money? Are you extortable? If you're in debt or whatever, then we need to know that, because maybe you can't work for Brinks or whatever.
Right. And you can get shut out from things in this way, not just by having a bad credit history, but you can be shut out from these things by having a limited credit history, just by having no credit history. I mentioned earlier that 80% of American adults have a credit score. Actually, it was 78% to be exact of American adults have a credit score. Of the other 22%, 11% have a credit score file that is limited or outdated and not possible to generate a current valid score from. The other 11% are considered credit invisible. They have no credit file at all with any of the three major bureaus. And, this can be young people. This can be young people that have not had the chance yet to build any kind of credit history. But this can also be situations like multi-generational homes, where people are more likely to pool their resources with family members, with their extended family and stuff like that. In the United States, this is something that's more common among households that are non-white. So again, a lot of this sort of stuff breaks down along these already existing, racial lines where this discrimination exists in the way these credit scores functions. And there's numerous ways that the existing structural inequality is built into the way that these credit reporting agencies operate, and they're totally unaccountable. And Carrie, I'll go ahead and pass it off to you. I think that you were going to give us a little bit of background on the credit bureaus themselves and sort of how we got to where we are today with these.
So credit reporting, in the sense that we know it, has been around a couple hundred years, and in the contemporary sense that we're all intimately familiar with, like you were saying, with the credit score, the FICO score, it's been around since the late 80s. And in the simplest terms, credit reporting exists because credit exists, right? And there's a lot you can talk about in terms of the history of credit. It's that the credit has existed for about 5,000 years. Ancient Sumerians had agricultural consumer loans as well as commercial credit to finance trade expeditions, and rulers would periodically sign clean slate decrees to wipe out consumer debt. In Babylon, the Code of Hammurabi established maximum interest rates on various types of loans, which were witnessed and recorded by public officials as contracts. Ancient Romans also had their own system of credit. There's an interesting article I found about this that cites some of the different poems and writings from ancient Rome that mention their system of credit, which are kind of fun, and I'll include a link to that in the description. But I want to focus primarily on the history of credit and credit reporting in America. So how is this stuff tracked? How did someone know they could extend credit to another person or organization in the early days of the American experiment? Well, up until a couple hundred years ago, it was mostly personal, especially when we're talking about individual consumer credit. Retailers generally knew their customers and whether or not they could be trusted to pay for something later. You were basically just letting your neighbors borrow from you. And the way this changed over time in the U.S. is described in this great book that Shane recommended to me by Josh Lauer, Creditworthy: A History of Consumer Surveillance and Financial Identity in America. And I'll read a little bit from that here. Quote, "As eastern cities and upstart interior towns filled with unfamiliar faces after the Civil War, the problem of judging creditworthiness was a problem for everyone, including small shopkeepers who allowed their neighbors to run up debts. In this new world of anonymity and transience, consumers who looked good, well-dressed, professional occupation, well-connected, often turned out to be the worst deadbeats. And just as troubling, someone who looked bad, shabby clothes, low-skill job, no references, often turned out to be entirely reliable and loyal customers. How could a merchant identify the good consumers and avoid the bad ones? This problem, the confounding task of deciding whom to trust and whom to invest in, led to the development of systematic credit surveillance in the United States. The first to produce such systems were commercial credit reporting firms that emerged during the 1840s." End quote. So you have firms like the Mercantile Agency, founded by Louis Tappan after he was kind of screwed over in the financial crisis of 1987. And the idea was to kind of catalog rumors about debtors' reputations and assets. And again, in the book, he goes on to describe how initially these firms were not actually concerned with consumer borrowers, but with commercial borrowers. But they were basically compiling heaps of personal information about all the people involved in trade and entrepreneurship. And in the 1850s, they started publishing rating books. The idea was to solve the problem of how you judge an individual's reputation or creditworthiness in a financial world that was increasingly distant and anonymous. Something needed to take the place of actually knowing people you're engaging in transactions with as you start dealing with people you don't know and might never see again. So by 1870, you start to see the same type of information compilation being done for consumers and not just commercial borrowers. And by the 1890s, this idea has spread all over the country, but there was no standard at that time. It wasn't particularly organized. Some firms just did blacklists. Others published yearly books with personal information for thousands of consumers. And all of this was incredibly subjective. Like one article I read mentions a credit reporter in Buffalo, New York, for example, noting that, quote, prudence in large transactions with all Jews should be used. And
Whoa.
It's still extraordinarily subjective because
Absolutely.
your credit score can, these algorithms that are used that are again secret, but they're also different depending on the three major credit agencies. So you could get a completely different score depending on the person that you're getting it from. And a lot of times incorrect information can end up on them as well, and you have very little recourse.
It can take years to fix it.
Yeah, actually getting that off of there. Yeah.
Yeah, and part of my intention in mentioning like the ludicrous subjectivity early on was to it's because I want to stress the idea that we've moved away from these early subjective measures is just not true. They've just transformed over time to give the illusion of objectivity, right? But anyway, in the early 1900s, a national association was formed to kind of bring all of this disjointed information together and the unconnected organizations together. And by 1940, more than 1,400 independently operated local credit bureaus were in this association.
1,400?
More than 1,400 by 1940. Yeah.
Love it.
Lauer also describes in the book how as time went on, the credit bureaus and credit managers who needed this kind of information worked hand in hand to develop the system of consumer surveillance. Consumer credit bureaus, credit managers, department stores, etc., started compiling and dissecting the same kind of information that the commercial bureaus did. And he explains something really interesting here. I think even though we've all kind of accepted credit monitoring as a part of life, a lot of the way we view credit reporting and modern financial surveillance is positioned in contrast with the earlier forms of subjective and localized credit reporting. Like I was saying before, early methods are seen as more primitive or inefficient, but the reality is that even before contemporary technology and data solutions, these firms were tracking sensitive, life-ruining data for literally millions of people, and they had sophisticated processes in place and specialists dedicated to this stuff. And what's interesting about this to me, and I'll touch on this again when I get to the FICO scores later, is that what we're familiar with today isn't really new, but is kind of positioned as this shiny, hyper-efficient, unbiased technological solution to making our lives easier. And to me, what this represents is the standardization of these older methods, which we find repugnant on their face, like the comment about Jews using technology. It's just kind of forgotten and pushed aside that there was a time when these bureaus tracked things like physical appearance, sexuality, political affiliation, health issues, etc. The credit bureaus today position themselves as unbiased and even helpful facilitators on the side of consumers, as we'll get into Shane's bit in a little bit too.
It's a good thing that they did away with health issues.
It's so good. I'm so glad. But they make money specifically by commodifying sensitive personal information that, if mishandled or even if properly handled, can just completely change your life. Like you were saying, Chris, you get to decide. It decides where you can live. It decides where you can work. It basically decides everything about your life, and there's no way to opt out. And this is not a secret. It never has been. Lauer touches on this. He describes how as early as the first half of the 20th century, credit bureaus publicized that they had all this information, and they advertised their capability to monitor consumers. And there's a short bit, again, I'd like to read here from the intro of that book. Quote, "The explicit aim of credit surveillance was to bend the financial behavior of Americans to the will of lenders. That is, to make them play the part of good consumers. Toward this end, credit professionals sought to inculcate norms of prompt payment and to shame consumers into honoring their promises, even while helping them dig themselves into further debt." End quote. And I'm sure that sounds familiar because it's the same thing we experience today. Like, for example, I use a site to monitor my credit, which kind of lists out for me the various financial sins and accomplishments that I have. And the same site is constantly sending me emails encouraging me to take out personal loans. Obviously, they're sending that because they get like a kickback from whoever's advertising that loan. So that's a whole other side of this, a whole other industry that has popped up around the idea of credit reporting and using the data that the credit bureaus collect. But anyway, all of this stuff started to be standardized in the early 1900s, always with the help of whatever the latest technology was at the time. So in the 60s, when the technology to digitize records became available, one of the longer lasting and larger firms, the Atlanta-based Retail Credit Company, or RCC, revealed plans to jump on this technology and computerize its records, which again, at the time, contained everything from what you'd expect, like financial history, assets, etc., to things you probably don't want digitally stored about yourself and your private life. And RCC, in addition to credit reporting to lenders, worked closely with insurance companies and employers to compile all kinds of information on people and provide it for various uses. They also helped with like insurance company investigations, like the opposite of an unbiased reporting agency. You know, they act like it's like a public service that they're doing this, but they're like in the background screwing you over. So there actually was a really big backlash when they decided that they wanted to computerize their records. Obviously, people were concerned that digitized records which could be more easily transferred, analyzed, and maintained, would be pretty much inescapable from a consumer standpoint. And this backlash, kind of surprisingly, did end up having an impact. It led to a series of congressional hearings that eventually led to the passing of something you might have heard of called the Fair Credit Reporting Act in October 1970.
Fair Credit Reporting Act.
You know, now that you mention it, I Googled free credit report when we were talking about it a second ago, and I was unsurprised to find the freecreditreport.com and all the other various iterations of it, like freecreditscore.com, they're owned by Experian.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Love it.
So with the passing of the FCRA, credit bureaus were required for the first time to allow consumer access to their files so that databases would no longer be secret. They also had to get rid of what was viewed as problematic data, like we talked about race, sexuality, and disability, and they were required to remove negative information after a certain period of time. If you've ever waited for something to fall off your credit report, that's because of the FCRA that it even falls off at all. They would keep it forever if they could.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I would not know about that. That's not something I'm familiar with.
Never happened to me. I don't have any debt.
Wouldn't be me.
But what happened then to those agencies that had been storing all that troubling data that they weren't supposed to have anymore? Our friends at RCC took a lot of heat during the congressional hearings. But in 1975, they changed their name to Equifax and continued on with digitizing their records as planned. Eventually, the other two major firms, Experian and TransUnion, would do the same. So while on the surface, the FCRA was meant to keep these agencies in check, and like I said, there are a lot of good things that it did. As one article I read put it, what it kind of ended up doing was ushering in a golden age of credit reporting. But even with computerized records, these agencies were still struggling with the subjective nature of interpreting consumer data. And that's where Fair, Isaac and Company comes in, or should I say, that's where we become aware of them. Founded in 1986, Fair, Isaac and Company had already been working with the credit bureaus, providing credit scoring algorithms for decades. And in 1989, their work culminated in the introduction of the FICO score. And this really kind of cemented the idea that each American has this inescapable, constantly surveilled financial identity that determines whether they're worthy of doing certain things. So this score... Sorry, was somebody going to say something?
Nope, that's, I was just vehemently agreeing, and I think it came out a little bit.
So this score was meant to be a more objective single measure of one's creditworthiness. And of course, like we've already said, it's not. The history of credit reporting is the history of ascribing moral value to someone trying to engage in a financial transaction. And in most cases, these are transactions that people need to engage in to have food, shelter, employment, and even healthcare, just basic necessities. And while we're told to empower ourselves by knowing our score and monitoring our credit, apart from our credit score and the free reports we're legally allowed to pull once a year, like you mentioned, Chris, we have no real visibility into the hundreds of more opaque risk models and screening models that are used by credit bureaus, lenders, landlords, employers, insurance companies, etc. And that problematic data that was expunged from the credit bureaus due to the FCRA about sexuality, disability, etc. still exists today, gathered and analyzed by unregulated data brokers and analytics firms. And I think in a sense, because it feels like there's no way to opt out of the system, we kind of become numb to the idea that all this stuff about us that can ruin our lives is stored on some distant computer that we have no control over. And we just kind of try not to think about it until something bad happens, whether it's a card being declined, being rejected for credit, a mistake on our credit report that we find. And like we mentioned, these mistakes are surprisingly common, not just mistakes on individual reports, but misreported data and also large-scale data breaches. And on that note, Dwight, why don't you tell us some of what goes on with this data that these extremely secure, objective credit bureaus are storing about us?
Can I, before I do that, can I just ask you guys a question? And maybe this is just like my fucking insane, anxious brain, but do you ever... Do you ever like prepare an excuse if when someone's running your credit card as to why it would why it would not go through?
That the first time that happened to me, I was like in college or something, and I think I like overdrafted or I don't know, but my card got declined at the grocery store, and I was like, run it again? Like I did not know what the fuck to do.
You try to craft like the incredulity, be like, what?
Well,
that's right. You know what?
Yeah, you have to do the little pantomime.
Maybe I don't know. I did use it at a store before I never really gone to, so maybe it must have been a security. Try this other card. That should be fine.
Let me call my assistant and see what's going on.
We all of a sudden become like, yeah, exactly. Like as you said, these like industrialists are like, wow, that's preposterous. That's simply preposterous. I'm going to call my banker right away.
Yeah.
I did it. I had that like going through my head the other day. Grocery shopping. Like, I just as a quick aside, like, even if we were to like quick transition to socialism tomorrow morning, it would take like 18 months for us to deprogram ourselves from like all of this like the ball of anxieties that we live in just to like be a consumer and exist in a mercantile way.
This is why we need crypto. Crypto.com.
I was trying to think of an equivalent for me because I've actually never had a credit card.
Yes, nice.
Specifically because it like just gives me huge amounts of anxiety, and I was trying to remember any time I was ever like declined with like my debit card. And I do remember one time I was at a restaurant and I like picked up the tab on we'd had a bunch of drinks and stuff, and it was declined, so I left.
Fucking hilarious.
I just was like, oh, let me check.
Fucking hilarious.
Bye-bye.
I just dined and dashed because I was like
fucking hilarious.
Terrified. I was like, I do not have any assets.
Yeah.
You know what? I was just thinking of. There was one time. I know Dwight, you probably remember this. A couple years ago, where I did this. I posted about it because I kept getting letters in the mail from Capital One saying that I'm like pre-approved for a car loan or something. And I posted and I was like, they keep sending me these, but I know that can't be true because I still owe them like $12,000 from a car that got repossessed a few years ago. And then like later that day, like the Capital One account replied to my tweet, hey Chris, sorry to bother you with those with the stuff we're sending. If you can give us your information, we can take you off that list or something like that. And I was like, no, nice try. Nice try. You're never getting that $12,000. Yeah.
See you in hell. That rules. So yeah, Carrie, exactly as you expressed there, what could possibly be problematic for these, opaque, enigmatic companies hoarding all of our data, that have far-reaching implications in pretty much every mercantile activity that we engage in commercially, especially governing some of the things that are most important to us, which is like housing and transportation and our income. Well, wouldn't it be a shame if somebody, I don't know, stole all of that information?
That could never happen.
You wouldn't think. And it happened in, I think, one of the largest privacy breaches in history of man.
In the history of man.
The way you searched for that too is so good.
In 2017, Equifax, our friends, everybody knows about this because it has literally affected every like adult and like every living taxpayer in the United States. So I'm just going to read really quickly from a CNBC article here And yeah, it's entitled Credit Reporting Firm Equifax Says Data Breach Could Potentially Affect 143 million U.S. consumers.
Jesus Christ.
Again, it's a little... I don't like, obviously, how it's framed there, just like saying consumers, because it almost implies that, like, it's optional.
Right.
You know, like, these are just people that want to buy things. But like you were explaining, it's fucking every aspect of your life. So it reads here, Equifax, which supplies credit information and other information services, said Thursday that a data breach could potentially affect 143 million consumers in the United States. The population of the United States, by the way, was, as of this is them writing this, was about 324 million.
Yeah, I was just looking it up because the number, apparently the number of adults in the United States in 2017 was 251 million.
Isn't that incredible?
That's so insane.
It's just so incredible. So so the majority of adults had their fucking identity stolen. Equifax said it discovered the breach on July 29th. Criminals exploited a U.S. website application vulnerability to gain access to certain files. And so it said, but the actual breach happened earlier than that. But what was interesting about this, and I'm going to switch to a Bloomberg article, because the question is, okay, there's going to be vulnerabilities in anything or whatever, and who really has the duty to to secure all of this hoarded information? Okay, but how is it handled? And I'm going to read here from this Bloomberg article from September of 2017, saying 3 Equifax managers sold stock before the cyber hack was revealed. 3 Equifax Incorporated senior executives sold shares worth almost $1.8 million in the days after the company discovered a security breach that may have compromised information on about 143 million Americans. May have. The trio had not yet been informed of the incident, the company said.
For sure, dude.
Interesting. The credit reporting service said earlier in a statement that it discovered the intrusion on July 29th. And for the record, it had happened in March.
That's so crazy.
All of this was completely... They had been gone for months before they even knew about it. But anyway, so they say. Regulatory filings showed that on August 1st, Chief Financial Officer John Gamble sold about $950,000.
His last name is Gamble.
Isn't that awesome? Joseph Logren, president of U.S. Information Solutions, I'm sure he wouldn't have known about this, exercised options to dispose of stock worth $485,000. And Rodolfo Ploder, the president of Workforce Solutions, sold about $250,000 of stock on August 2nd. So again, this was just when they found out about it, but the senior executives, didn't know about it. So, so supposedly some lower level people at Equifax said, seems like nearly all of our data is breached. The first thing I'm going to do is not tell the senior executives. That's what they're painting the picture to say. And by the way, none of the filings list transactions as being part of these scheduled trading plans. So interesting. The 3, I love this. The 3, quote, sold a small percentage of their Equifax shares, says Ines Gutzmer, a spokeswoman for the Atlanta-based company. They, quote, had no knowledge that an intrusion had occurred at the time.
For sure, dude.
Gamble sold more than 13% of his stake in Equifax. Logren sold 9% of his holdings, and Ploder disposed of 4%. Equifax said in its statement that intruders accessed names, social security numbers, birth dates, addresses, and driver's license numbers, as well as credit card numbers for about 209,000 consumers. The incident ranks among the largest cybersecurity breaches since the Big Bang. So obviously, I mean, and from another article here, I think it said that, in overnight trading, once this news had gotten out, that the shares had plummeted by over 12%. So again, I'm not saying that's allegedly, they didn't know that this had happened. But if it were me and my company was about to lose over 10% of its market value, in overnight, basically, maybe I would probably want to do the same thing if I were in their position, if I had, $1 million worth of options that I could exercise.
Sure.
That audio clip will be played back in court at some point.
So
I would steal if I could. I'm sorry. Go on.
So, man, now this is a very interesting thing. Again, this is from 2017. So this is a quote from Bart Friedman, who's a senior counsel at Cahill, Gordon and Reindel, which advises boards on matters including corporate compliance and enforcement challenges. He said in this Bloomberg article, quoted as saying, "I don't know how the board will allow these executives to continue in their positions. Yes, they should have a careful investigation and have an independent law firm review the executives and review their emails and determine what they knew and when, but the end result is likely clear," right? How can you possibly, even from a PR perspective, even if they didn't, have knowledge and you can't prove that they had, prior knowledge of this before exercising all of their options, from a PR perspective alone, you get rid of them. You cut them the fuck out. You can't have the fucking CFO be seen as like doing insider trading. You just can't.
Or can you?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that because John Gamble is still the CFO to this day of Equifax Incorporated.
Oh, God.
Yes, he is. Yes, he is. There was no consequences. He's still there. And in fact, what's so funny too is I saw from Equifax's YouTube page, there's this like 2-minute video from the CEO of Equifax supposedly trying to speak to 143 million Americans.
Oh my God.
To reassure them that they're okay. And just for fun, Shane, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure, yeah.
Could we play this quick? Just like 45 seconds of it or something, just so we could see.
Okay, I'm good to play this.
All right, so play that funky music.
As you're probably aware, earlier today,
What a
we announced
strange-looking man.
cybersecurity incident that has impacted those who rely on us to protect their personal information. I want to take a few minutes to talk with you about it and make sure you have the facts.
Yeah, he should be doing like
I want to let you know what we're
Bill
doing
Clinton
to help those impacted by
pointing
this
with
event.
your thumb thing.
On July 29th of this year, we discovered that attackers had gained unauthorized access to certain Equifax data files. We acted immediately to stop the intrusion. We promptly engaged a leading cybersecurity firm, which has been conducting a comprehensive forensic review to determine the scope of the intrusion. We also reported the event to law enforcement and continue to work with authorities. The unauthorized access occurred between mid-May and July. I'm pleased to report that the review found no evidence of unauthorized activity on our core credit reporting databases.
Look at his pupils.
This is clearly a disappointing event.
How much
and one
ecstasy
that
is he
strikes
on
at the
right
heart
now?
of who we are and what
He's
we do.
loving this.
I deeply regret this incident, and I apologize to every affected consumer and all of our partners. We all know that the threats to data security are growing by the day. And while we've made significant investments in cybersecurity, we have more to do, and we will. This incident is a test for all of us at Equifax. It tests our values, and it's a test to our resolve. I know you'll all agree that our first priority must be
Shut the
to
fuck
support
up.
consumers.
Do you want me to stop?
Like he's fucking Napoleon.
Of offering every US consumer in the
hyping up
country
his people, hyping up
comprehensive
soldiers.
package.
I'll stop it there.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just shut the fuck up.
It's also like, I don't remember the exact wording he used, but like the attempt to like minimize this or whatever and like stress their commitment to security. Like this happened because on the credit dispute site that you could use to say there's an error on my credit report, they didn't update the back-end software. And so hackers were able to get in, which is just like such like a basic stupid thing to allow to happen when you're this kind of company.
Comments are turned off for this video, unfortunately.
I noticed that immediately.
Yeah.
So what does this mean, right? I mean, this means that for a period of months that this stuff had been, breached. I mean, obviously constantly there are hackers and scammers or whatever. I don't even know what that word means, but like
Guys like me.
trying to, poke and prod and look for, weaknesses in cybersecurity for these large firms, because the payoff of getting all of this is huge, right?
Yeah.
Now, I am going to read here from a 2019 article saying, from TechCrunch, saying FTC slaps Equifax with a fine of up to $700 million for a 2017 data breach. And by the way, you should see the we should make this the episode art. Actually, look at the picture in here. The guy behind the CEO.
That is pretty good.
So yeah, it says here, credit agency Equifax will pay up to $700 million in fines as part of a settlement with federal authorities over a data breach in 2017. The FTC said in a statement Monday that Equifax has agreed to initially pay about $575 million in fines as part of a settlement with the federal government and states over its, quote, failure to take reasonable steps to secure its network that led to the breach. Yeah, obviously it was a complete fucking failure, but has anything fundamentally changed? No, it's not. The problem of this wasn't because we just need credit reporting bureaus to have better security, cybersecurity, and all that stuff. The fact that this information is accumulated at all is the problem.
Yeah.
Because always you're going to have people that are extremely bright and talented, hackers or whatever.
Guys like me.
that are trying to get a hold of it because it's very valuable.
Yeah.
When they're not deleting boomers' Twitter accounts, they have stuff like this to get into.
That's right. Now I haven't found anything to support this claim, but as Shane, you've taught me, you can just assert things. So I'm going to assert this, is that, when you get calls from scam calls saying like, hey, I'm an agent with the Secret Service or the fucking the Federal Reserve or whatever.
You need to send me gift cards.
Now, a lot of times they are referencing personal information. They are cross-checking this information to see if it works. And I'm going to share a personal anecdote that I hope you don't mind. I will share, is that a colleague of someone close to me who is has an immigration status that, it's, especially this was like happened under Trump. This was a few years ago. So like at the time where we felt like, especially people that are here on trying to get their green card or apply for like, a permanent immigration status, it was feeling like a very terrifying, like, am I going to be able to be allowed here when this neo-fascist character had come into power and all that stuff and had restricted to the Muslim ban? It was a terrifying time. Now the Biden administration is doing it, but they're smiling. So this colleague was in tears because she had gotten a call from one of these scams saying, is this your name? Is this your address? Is this your social security number? We are going to disallow your immigration status unless you pay this.
Oh my God.
And, they asked me like, is this real? And I said, just hang up immediately. It's a scam.
Right.
But I mean, the tears and the terror on this poor woman's face was very fucking real. And it's not something I'm ever going to forget.
That's
and
so horrifying.
I believe that it stands to say, where did all of this information go and what is it being used for? And I am asserting that I believe that it is being used for purposes such as this, which is to scam people for a variety of reasons, and for financial compensation, to try to get money out of people, scaring them using this personal information or just scamming them themselves. I've had a member of my family that had their identity stolen and, had like fucking 25 accounts opened in his name. It's terrifying. It's super terrifying. And that is a result directly from breaches like this. This was one of the largest ones. Again, over half of American adults had their shit stolen, and it's out there still.
Yeah.
So what did they do about it? They give you free credit checks.
Yeah.
The CFO that sold money supposedly didn't know about this. He's still the CFO of Equifax. I mean, it's a complete fucking joke, basically. Not much happened. Not much happened is the answer. And so despite the fact that all of this hell had been wrought, on us, basically there's no consequences. So, as much as I love this guy that was quoted in Bloomberg for being a, white hat lawyer saying these people should never work for a publicly traded company again or whatever, they're still in their positions years later. So it's a fucking joke.
Well, the good news is if you're really scared about your identity getting stolen, you can pay Equifax $10 a month for their credit monitoring service, which is really convenient.
Yes.
That's right.
It's so
That's
easy.
right.
Why wouldn't you?
That's correct.
I mean, we're
That
all
is
scared
correct.
about it. We got to keep track of it.
That is correct.
God, imagine paying that off with on credit.
Oh, that's fucking bleak. That's fucking bleak.
I was just going to say, it should very clearly be illegal for them to sell credit monitoring services. It makes no fucking sense that they're allowed to do that. They should be monitoring if your identity is being stolen by virtue of the fact that they're entrusted with this data. But no.
Nope.
No.
They should be monitoring the speed with which my boot is coming for their ass.
They should monitor my fucking... I'm not going to say that.
So, Shane, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I believe what we didn't say... Sorry, go ahead, Carrie.
I was going to say, before we do that, I did want to mention, I think it was TransUnion that put marked a bunch of people as terrorists.
What?
Yeah.
Does that affect your credit positively or negatively?
It's not great. You would think that it's good,
Okay.
but it's actually really, really bad.
Right.
Yeah, they were falsely reported by TransUnion on and this shows also how the government and these credit reporting agencies work together, because it was a government list of terrorists and security threats. It was several thousand people were reported as terrorists. So it's even without even apart from the security breaches, they could just do whatever. They could put whatever on your credit report, and it takes a lot of effort to fucking fix it. I think that the class action lawsuit about this, at least the last time that I heard about it, it was the Supreme Court had limited the scope of the recourse for the thousands of people that had been identified as terrorists that had a consequence, and for the people that were didn't have a quote unquote concrete injury, they couldn't get any money from TransUnion at all. So it's pretty cool. They can just kind of do this, and it's no big deal.
Unbelievable. Total fucking joke. So yeah, we haven't mentioned yet, but there was an op-ed that catalyzed us to do this episode. So Shane, let me turn it over to you to flesh that out a bit more.
Yeah, well, now as you guys have mentioned, there are a lot of problems with the data that gets collected for to assemble your credit score and the way that it's held on to. All this stuff about it supporting all these different kinds of biases and arbitrary subjective modes that reinforce existing inequities, as well as the problems with security of housing all this data together. So what is the solution? The solution is maybe more data, right? There needs to be more information collected in order to get more accurate credit scores out there. And so
could we secure it with the blockchain?
Whoa,
oh God!
Now we're talking
Credit
Fuck.
NFT. Oh man,
And
Can I
immediately-
sell an NFT of my bad credit to get good credit and pay off my debts?
Oh, there it is, baby. Blockchain startup Bloom partners with TransUnion to offer credit monitoring. They're
There you
already
go.
doing it. There it is,
go.
baby. I'm sorry. Go on. I had to look it up.
No. But yeah, so Dwight, as you mentioned a couple of days ago, there was this piece in The Hill called How Expanded Credit Data Can Help Tackle Inequities by Christopher A. Cartwright, who happens to be the CEO of TransUnion. And it's
Interesting.
a pretty, awful and horrible little op-ed piece, and I'll read a bit from it in a second, and you can listen to the framing of it and also what in particular they mean when they're saying they want more data, specifically qualitatively what kind of data they're talking about. But I was trying to find some other stuff about Cartwright, and basically all I could really come up with is that he's been at TransUnion since 2013, but he was made CEO in 2019. His major accomplishment thus far in the past 2 years of his tenure has been leading the acquisition of another company called New Star Security Services, which TransUnion just bought for $3.1 billion. And that went into effect December 1st. So, like, this just recently happened. So I looked into New Star just out of curiosity. It's like an informations analytic company. And again, it sort of emphasizes the technological security element. If you were maybe feeling a little sensitive after the stuff that Dwight was just talking about in terms of the the breaches. And New Star has an interesting history as well. It originally started in 1998 as a business unit within Lockheed Martin.
Yes!
And then it was spun
Yes.
off. So that's what they're up to. So let's get to this piece that Christopher Cartwright wrote. And so I'm going to read through here. I'm going to skip some of it as we go. But as we go, I mean, I believe everybody, like all of you guys have read this already, right? So, I mean, feel free to jump in at any point. And also for the listener, right? One of the reasons why I thought it would be useful to read this out instead of just summarizing it is, again, it's a very tactful kind of framing that goes throughout. So, starting at the top here. The recent jobs numbers provide a glimmer of hope that the worst of the pandemic recession in the United States is behind us. Even so, we must guard against a recovery that exacerbates the inequities that have been so apparent well before we ever heard of COVID-19. One of the key pathways to opportunity in this country is access to credit. Yet what should be a gateway is too often a roadblock because so many people have limited credit histories. Indeed, about 60 million people in the U.S. have a thin credit file, or none at all, and that puts them at an economic disadvantage. So, like, Chris, I mean, you were initially talking, you know, what it's like 80% of Americans that have credit scores, they want the whole pie. They want all 100%.
Gimme the data.
Credit reports are intended to be factual reflections of a person's credit history. But for millions of Americans, credit reports, or the lack of a credit history altogether, reflects something else. An economic system that is imbalanced, especially for communities of color, low-income families, younger adults, and immigrants.
Wow.
Because of this, some of the
He
stepping
cares so
stones...
much.
Yeah. Some of the stepping stones to the American dream, such as college education, home ownership, and entrepreneurship, are simply out of reach for too many people. We believe the way to create a fair system for everyone is for credit reports to include more and better data. By expanding the types of data that go into credit reports and offering ways for lenders to get a more comprehensive picture of people's financial histories over time, our financial system can work for more Americans. So again, if you're listening to this, you maybe are seeing where this is going, but what kind of data do you think he's talking about here when he says we need to get more data? And think about like all the stuff that's already included, that Chris, you went down, right? Like it's all your, you know, your payment histories, the credit burden. What was the other percentage? It was like,
credit history, payment history, debt burden, type of credit used.
Sort of one like fucking shoe size or something? I don't get it.
So, what kind of data is it? So he continues, our company has long advocated for additional financial information to be included in these reports, such as rent, phone, cable, internet, and utility payments to paint a more complete picture of a consumer. This alternative financial data, when available, helps capture how Americans meet their monthly financial obligations, and in turn, helps lenders extend more credit.
I want everybody's Venmo receipts. I want to know the emojis that they included in them.
So the next portion of this goes into how Fannie Mae has been encouraging renters to report their their payment to their landlords or whatever. But it's initially framed as like a pro-consumer thing, right? Like, hey, if you're if you rent an apartment or a house or whatever, and you've been regularly making those payments, don't you want that to be reflected on your credit?
No,
but that's all voluntary. And so then listen, here's where the turn is, the framing here. There is deep consensus that the reporting of this data creates a more accurate financial picture for many Americans. But alternative financial data is not always available to the credit reporting agencies and lenders, and using it is not yet the norm. The system must change, but the changes will not take root through the actions of credit reporting agencies alone. Landlords, phone companies, and utility providers need to report their consumers' responsible payment behavior so those hardworking Americans can get the credit they deserve for regularly meeting their financial obligations.
I'm sure our landlord wants to help us.
Don't you trust your landlord and,
Yeah.
your utility?
Right.
Those institutions that everybody loves.
Fucking Comcast or like AT&T or whatever. And you're like, all the things that are so helpful in your day-to-day life.
The interesting thing about that too is like, if you were to involve a company like Comcast, for example, let's say, like every single time I've like canceled Comcast because I moved, they keep charging me. Imagine making a company like Comcast responsible for reporting correct data to the credit bureaus. That would be insane.
Right. Not even a question of if they were able to do it like tactfully and in a way to target, but just like the gross irresponsibility of those companies of managing like basic fucking accounts, right?
Right.
And then, of course, not to mention your fucking landlord. I mean, he's calling for the people who already have total financial control over most Americans to be snitches as well.
Right.
And to compel them to be snitches. And that's where then this next paragraph gets into. Congress has a critical role to play in advancing credit inclusion through alternative data. Senators Tim Scott and Joe Manchin and Rep. French Hill have championed the Credit Access and Inclusion Act to encourage the reporting of rent, utility, and phone payments to the credit reporting agency. So now they want to make it fucking law. And he's pushing for that as well. The rest of that, he gets into some other legislation. I think it's like extending credit to like veterans and kind of drapes the language again in the sort of sacrifice that veterans make. Shouldn't they get good credit even though they're not able to like buy a car because they're overseas or whatever bullshit. But just skipping over that and getting to the conclusion of this here, the whole of the U.S. economy would thrive if more credit-invisible people were welcomed into the financial system. And I wanted to read that
invisible.
Because, Chris, you said that earlier, too, and it's just such a fucking nightmarish phrase. Credit invisible.
But the framing as if he's some sort of like fucking social justice crusader.
Right.
We hear you, we see you, we want to hear you. We want to see you.
Right.
We want to know everything about you.
They've all learned to, take pieces of like woke liberal, like sort of like social justice-y type stuff and just infuse all of this same old bullshit with that stuff now as well.
I mean, like, again, the problem, like, even the way that this fucking piece starts, which is like, this is a very unequal country. It's like, this is the reason. Extending more lines of credit isn't gonna fucking improve that situation. Yeah. Anyway, just let me read the last paragraph here. Our company's efforts are significant, but progress on the scale our nation needs requires an all-hands-on-deck approach. Equity and credit access must be our nation's collective goal, as we cannot celebrate an economic recovery that leaves tens of millions of Americans behind. I'm not exactly sure what economic recovery that's even supposed to be talking about, but again, you get the gist of it. Like we just said, it's all wrapped up in this kind of like soft, like seemingly progressive language, right? Like this is about helping people.
We're trying to help you.
But ultimately, it's just about collecting more data in order to do more surveillance, and it's pushing specifically, attempts at legislation to make it mandatory to make credit even more like all-encompassing, and to be, those elements of your life, the ability that you would then have to move throughout the world and like purchase things and get access again to all the things that you need in your life, to put that in the hands of people like your fucking landlord or your phone company. I looked into it as well, just to get a sense, because, when he's saying here, there's this economic recovery that leaves tens of millions of Americans behind. Didn't leave Cartwright behind. You want to take a stab at how much he's worth?
Oh, so much. I don't know.
Let's see.
He's not a billionaire, of course.
No.
It's
not that high.
$12 million.
I'm going to say 30 million.
Chris, you want to take a stab?
31 million.
Chris, as usual, you are correct.
God damn it! He can't do the Price is Right move every time.
He did it.
The estimate is that he's worth about $50 million.
Oh my God.
And most of that is wrapped up in stock of TransUnion, as well as he sold in 2020 a huge amount of stock, and the estimate is around like $25-26 million.
So that's
like
maybe they had a data breach.
Yeah, exactly. And then the rest of his net worth is from whatever else he still has vested in the company.
That's so cool. But think about how much more he could have if they had files on 60 million more people that they could then sell credit monitoring to.
Yeah.
You think about how many houses he could buy. I mean, where's it? What kind of house does he have now? Where is it?
Yeah. What's
Or
the
he could-
address?
I actually the site that I got his like net worth from, it's called wallmine.com. It's like a stock ticker thing, and it's like one of those bullshit aggregate sites that pulls a bunch of information from a bunch of different places. And I think there is an address listed here, but it's like the mailing address for TransUnion.
Yeah, smart.
Well, that's
Smart.
something. It's something.
Yeah,
It's a start.
Yeah. So that's the solution, right? That's the thing that's being proposed as a way to fix all of the problems that we've talked about, is essentially give these companies more power, get more information on people. And it's one of the reasons why I like that Lauer book, Carrie, that you were reading a bit from a lot, is that when we think about credit, we don't often think of it in terms of surveillance, but that's what
Right.
it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's consumer surveillance. It's financial surveillance. And it's, not even done by like the state or whatever. It's like these opaque fucking large companies that just like for whatever reason, they've cornered the market and they're just in charge of letting everybody else know like who's worthy and who's not.
Yeah.
And look, I mean, and for, in his opinion, as, a guy with a vested interest in quantifying, as much about American life as possible for their, quote, creditworthiness, then why stop at their phone bill and their landlord and shit like that?
Mm-hmm.
Why not, integrate with the NSA and see where these people, why aren't they showing up for work? They need to work to be able to earn the wage to pay off, fucking their mattress or whatever. This is the kind of shit. Of course they would want that, right? The total control of your, your comings and goings to decide whether or not, what they should lend to you.
If they track stuff like your your utility bill payments, and it's theoretically possible that, they could track stuff like, if you use the internet, like what sites you use, or if you have like Comcast. So maybe ideally, in a couple of years, your credit score can also reflect like what media you consume, right? Like,
that would be so cool.
If you have like a Disney Plus subscription, that's like a big boost, because, Disney is a reliable, safe brand. But if you're on Tubi, you're a cheap piece of shit.
Hulu? Come on.
You're done. Get out of here.
Can't trust them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Answer this 10-question quiz about the Marvel Cinematic Universe in order to boost your credit score.
Why not just have prices change based off of your creditworthiness? That's what it is anyway, with like, with in interest payments. But why not just have the actual cost of the good change with with your creditworthiness?
Oh.
I mean,
not?
certainly if somebody can pay more, then it would only be fair and make sense to charge them more for it.
Yep, that's how it works. That's how it all works. Well, I'm glad that we did this, because now I feel worse.
I just read, and I did not know this, but like the main way that they make their money, all of the big three, is selling the data to banks and credit card companies.
Yes. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's how you get those pre-approved offers or whatever, because they will just send a list of millions of people that have a credit score above whatever they want, and then they just use that. I didn't realize that. That rocks.
Yeah, I
That's
mean,
so
this
cool.
is that, when you apply for credit, what do you give? You give your name, your social security number, your address, and like your estimated yearly income, which whatever. And, within fucking like 35 seconds, the algorithm runs it, and they're like, yeah, get this person, they can buy a toothbrush or whatever. So it's instantaneous.
Yeah.
And it should just not exist. In my humble opinion, going back to what we were learning about earlier with the productivity pay gap, we should just be paid more so that we could just buy things with the money that we have instead of the money that we will have.
I think the government should give me a house for free.
Where does it stop? Really radical stuff. I don't like where this is going. A little too radical for me. No. I am the CEO of a major credit reporting bureau.
Yeah.
All right.
And, I
I'm
think...
going to do...
say that. Beep that out for sure.
Beep that out.
What was I gonna say? Please beep it out. What was I gonna say? I forgot. I lost it. Fuck. It was something about the article.
Free credit report.
Oh, that actually jogged my memory. What's really insidious about it is that like the way that this is framed, like the average person would read this and be like, oh, well, data is unbiased. And if they have more
Right.
data, it can only be good.
Yes.
Right.
And it's just like that idea is like so pervasive, and that's what like all these financial institutions and tech companies and everything use to justify like all kinds of things. That data can't have like, you know, ethics. It doesn't have values. It is what it is. Even though like the data that they have is just like in a lot of cases wrong, or it's data that can like ruin your life or whatever. Like the idea of giving them more of that is just like so absurd. But in the current context that people like view this stuff in, it does sound like, oh, he's a nice guy. He wants to help these 60 million people.
Sure, yeah. You put in on enough of the like kind of tokenistic, soft, helpful language, and you mix that then with all like the techno babble shit. And I mean, I was pretty surprised. Like, you know, like here, I'll just show it to you guys. But if I went to that the site for that company that TransUnion just got, like Neustar or Newstar, and it's just like I was trying to figure out what the fuck do they do, and it was it was just babble. It's just all like techno solutionist babble, and it's not worth really playing. But there's a video there with Chris Cartwright and some other people from Newstar, and look, first of all, they look like shit. But second of all, like I watched like a couple of minutes of it, you know, because usually if we're covering somebody, I like to get a sense of like how they sound and, you know, the way that they present themselves, and it was just like the most bland, lack of charisma, like, you know, technological solutions for a digital age with information security, analysis, marketing, occupational economy jobs. It just like endless.
Yeah. If there's one thing that I've learned from the course of doing this show, it's the more vague the self-described, you know, business activities or whatever, like the more vague they are in saying what they do, the more fucking evil that they are.
Sure, it's all just
like without
a
exception.
Mask. It's like a mask to cover up whatever horrible things are going on in the background. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we should wrap this one up before we start to before I have to get bleeped for anything else.
Sure.
If you listen to this episode, your credit score has just plummeted. We are so sorry.
We are so sorry.
We are not financially responsible.
Go to freecreditreport.com now to find out all about it.
So, all right, it's time to pay the bills, guys. Free credit report. Do you have a good credit report, John? Yeah, no, my credit report's really good because I make sure to pay all my bills on time. That's why I use Bill Pay Zelle from Chase. What about you, Tommy? Is it good for you? Oh yeah, no, it's really good for me because you know, I get I get royalties from the CIA every day, and that's where I put my money. So free credit report, guys. It's great. You should check it out.
Can you do quick just as Sleepy Biden, just freecreditreport.com, but with like a breathy inhale between each word?
I'm sorry. I'm just laughing just thinking about it.
Free credit report. It's credit reporting, but it's free. We're free as Americans. That's one of the things that we have is God-given right in this country is ability to have our every bit of data quantified by three bureaus, three very smart bureaus. I once applied for a credit card in 1976.
They digitized my information on a giant roll of magnetic tape.
I wanted to go to Diners Club. I want to take out my new wife. Show her around Scranton. They went to this place. You could choose bake your own potato. It's a loaded potato. It was kind of nice. She said you shouldn't eat those bacon bits so much. It's not good for your heart. It's gonna be bad for you. And I agreed with her, but I told her I'm Irish. I eat a lot of potatoes. But can I just say,
President Trump, your rebuttal?
Listen, I've had the loaded potatoes in Bedminster, New Jersey, where I have my golf course, and I thought, well, I have had this potato up here in Bedminster, but I prefer them down at the winter White House in Mar-a-Lago, and I thought, I like the potato. I've seen the potato before. I'm going to have the loaded potato, perhaps potato skins. Not a lot of people are talking about potato skins, but I'm thinking more potato skins. Probably we're thinking in the 2024 White House, we're going to have potato skins. I think I have no idea. I've blacked out. I don't know what the fuck we're talking about.
Perfect place to end.
That's it, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh, I remember what it was. Unironically, my favorite Biden moment, and please put this in if we can find it, is when he's like walking just hurriedly through like some reporters or whatever, and a reporter from the BBC says,
Mr. Biden, a quick word for the BBC.
The BBC, I'm Irish.
He just turns around and he goes, I'm Irish. All right, folks, cut up your credit cards and
don't pay your bills.
That's correct.
I'm not saying that.
All right, goodbye.
All
goodbye.
Right.
Stay cool.
Love you so
everybody.
much. Love you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Well, I was shopping for a new car. Which one's me? A cool convertible or an SUV? Too bad I didn't know my credit was whack, cause now I'm driving off the lot in a used subcompact. FREE, that spells free. Creditreport.com, baby. Saw their ads on my TV. Thought about going but was too lazy. Now instead of looking fly and rolling fat, my legs are sticking to the vinyl and my posse's getting laughed at. FREE, that spells free. Creditreport.com, baby.
Offer applies with enrollment and Triple Advantage.